Welcome again to Co-operative Conversations, the live stream series where we connect you to the real stories of Australian primary producers who are working and building their businesses together cooperatively, regardless of all the trials and tribulations that they may encounter. It's been obviously a very tough few years for Australian farming and Australian agriculture, highlighting, I guess, the importance of Australian farmers, foresters, and fishers, not only to the country and to the communities, but of course to our national economy. Hi, I'm Pete Lewis, and one way or another, I've been helping Australian farmers tell the great stories of food and fibre production in this country for the past 25 years. And look, to be honest, this week we could not probably have found a more passionate farmer to talk about the family farming scenario in this country than Emma Robinson. But before we get to Emma, I do want to remind you that we have a poll question tonight, and it's an important one, and we want to get your involvement in it. Tonight's poll question is, what is the biggest motivator for starting a cooperative? Now, some of the quite varied choices you have tonight to choose from: increase yields, maximising returns, sharing resources or knowledge, capital raising, always vital, delivering more value at the farm gate, and scaling. Now, click on the poll in the live chat to the right of this stream to select your answer. Now, as I said, let's get right into it. Let's get up towards Charters Towers in North Queensland. Emma Robinson is a cattle farmer in that neck of the woods, and she spent several years studying various farm models. She's convinced that cooperative farming is the way forward for Aussie farmers, and she has founded the Beef Collaboration Project, Incorporated, with a focus on enabling family farmers to leverage greater scale, optimise their production systems, and create new value in beef supply chains. Welcome along, Emma, and by the look of it, you are coming from your kids' classroom on your property there near Charters Towers.
Thanks, Pete. It's great to be here. Yes, my kids do school there. And this is where we get the strongest internet connection. So hence why I'm in the classroom this afternoon.
And I guess you must have watched with great interest as the rest of the country had to come to grips over the past 6 months or so with working from home and particularly schooling from home.
Well, it was really business as usual for us, Pete. We live in a fairly isolated area. So apart from a bit of, grocery shortages, the old toilet supply shortages that everyone experienced, for us, it was really business as usual.
Now, what is also business as usual is the up and downs of some pretty volatile seasons. And going back over the last 12 months or so, it's been a very character building time for the northern beef industry, of which you are smack bang in the middle of it. If it's not drought, it's floods. And of course, we mentioned the pandemic. How have things been going for you?
Look, it's certainly been a tough period, I think, for graziers, particularly in the north. And I think a lot of graziers, we've gotten really good at managing variability. So whether that be a lack of rainfall and really looking at how we better manage our grass, or its price variability, and we're really looking at, how we can maximise, different prices in different markets. What we've certainly gotten better at is managing variability. So whatever the conditions, whether they be drought, flood, pandemics, we're getting better all the time at managing to all those different changes.
Where do your cattle go? Where do you aim them? What are you trying to produce?
So we run an extensive grazing enterprise. We have about 55,000 hectares. So we've got 2 properties in the north and a property in central Queensland, and we're all grass-fed. So we really target those grass-fed markets. But as you'd know, in the north, sometimes it doesn't rain. So we're looking at different markets all the time and looking to really optimise, our production and also the markets to which we sell. So, managing variability is really what we do, and I think it's what we're getting pretty good at.
Now, as I said in the introduction, you've been scanning the horizon, studying the business of farming and looking at various different options and different farming models. What got you interested in the cooperative approach?
Well, I cut my teeth out of uni as an extension officer. And I guess pretty quickly I saw the great value in farmers sharing knowledge, sharing insights, and working together. So that's something that I've, always been really passionate about. Now in our own grazing enterprise, I guess we've experienced, firsthand some of the challenges that family farming enterprises face. So I guess key to that was, 2014 with the shutdown of the live export markets. We, magnified the issue of drought. We were looking at, 6 months to get cattle into a meatworks in the north. So we really felt like we were living life at the end of the food chain. And I guess in that period, we used those insights and that frustration that we were feeling to really start thinking about, is there more to simply being a producer of a product? And, at that time, we were getting very low prices for cattle at a time when, the beef market, the prices for beef were at world highs. And I guess we're seeing the reverse of some of those trends at the moment, but it really highlighted the cyclical nature of the industry that we're in and really got us, wondering about, what can we do? We're passionate about where we are and what we do, but but there's got to be more to it. To be here in the long term, to pass up our enterprise onto the next generation, we've got to be thinking outside simply being farmers, I think. And there's a great quote from Teddy Roosevelt, and it says, do what you can where you are with what you have. And I guess that's the approach we've taken. How can we leverage what we've got? So, it's not about doing something completely different, but how can we leverage and build on the great things that we're already doing?
Now, you were awarded a Churchill Fellowship, which I guess was another opportunity for you to think a little bit outside the square. You got a chance to study abroad. What did you pick up on that journey that really helped inform your approach and particularly hone you in on the cooperative approach?
Absolutely. So I applied to the Churchill on the basis of that frustration that we were feeling in regards to, profitability primarily. And I really went wanting to see what other family farmers were doing around the world and how they were sort of leveraging profitability. How were they making their businesses more profitable? So I spent 3 months looking at farming models in the UK, in Canada and the US. And I saw lots of similar challenges to what we're facing in Australia. Issues around, scale, processor consolidation, and long-term issues about the profitability of the family farm. And really, I guess from them, and I didn't seek out just cooperatives. I looked at lots of different models. But wherever I went, I certainly saw the cooperative structure, particularly in the UK and the US. They have a history of cooperatives. Primarily, cooperatives has been used as a model to deal with, a problem that they have. So when the local pub shut and they wanted to keep it open, they formed a cooperative to keep it open. When they needed power through the US Midwest, they formed a cooperative and they made it happen. When they wanted to get cheaper fuel, they formed a cooperative and they made it happen. So cooperatives were through the landscape, really responding to issues that farmers had, not just farmers, rural communities, issues that they had around wanting access to services that they couldn't otherwise get through mainstream business models. So I certainly saw cooperatives. I saw lots of examples of family farmers being in the supply chain. So not just selling to the supply chain, but being in the supply chain. And I also saw lots of examples of, enterprises leveraging the value of the family farm. So that idea of the family farm being used as credit in terms of how they were marketing their products. So, they were really, a lot of businesses were really leveraging their story on the idea that they were based on family farmers. So I really saw the credential, the value of that. And one quick example of a cooperative that I saw that I keep talking about because it's such a great example. So I turned up in a small town in Kansas and had a meeting in a very nondescript office, which was their cooperative headquarters. So there was a few meeting rooms, a couple of computers and a few staff. And this cooperative was turning off over 600,000 head of cattle to a major processor. So they formed, they were feedlotters. They formed because they were frustrated with the prices they were getting as small feedlotters. They aggregated their pool of cattle, and they really went and knocked on processors' doors and asked how they could add value. And they were really interesting, not only because they were obviously significant producers running on a very streamlined system, but they weren't about doing everything themselves. They were really looking for how they could add value. And I think that was a great example. And so from all of that insight, I guess I came back really passionate for the cooperative story and seeing that as a great vehicle, particularly for family farmers, in leveraging new value on top of what they're already doing.
So if I've got the story straight, you've travelled the world, soaked up all that information, you turn yourself into the Wizard of Oz, click your heels, you're back in Charters Towers, and you decide the next thing you're going to do is create something that you've called the Beef Collaboration Project. Tell us how that came together and what you wanted it to achieve.
Yeah, well, that's right, Pete. I mean, you can't do a Churchill Fellowship and have that insight and do nothing with it. I mean, you've got to take that leap and you've got to have a go. And I guess my having a go was, forming the Beef Collaboration Project a number of years ago now. We were lucky that at the same time I was talking about cooperatives, a lot of other people were also talking about the power of cooperatives. So we got some really invaluable seed funding through the Farming Together program, funded by the federal government. And that was invaluable in really establishing some capacity to lay the foundation. So we formed a founding group of members, and we started the process of building the business model around how can we leverage value? So that was the question we were trying to answer. What can we do differently to really leverage value? And that was really the start of the process.
Everybody gets the idea that there is strength in numbers, and yet you are in a business that is notorious for rugged individualists who like to go their own way and do their own way. What was the selling point? How did you get them over the line, and how hard was it to get them over the line and get them involved?
Look, I think there are a lot of businesses like ours that are profitable businesses that are humming away fairly well, but looking for something more. And I think it's about tapping into those enterprises. So there's a group of people out there like us. We don't count ourselves as a large producer. We're not really a small producer. We're in that middle ground. Producers like us humming away that are asking what else is out there, how can we do more? And I think there are certainly a lot of producers out there that are getting bigger themselves and driving that opportunity themselves, going into looking at value adding and processing and marketing. But I think there's a lot of us in that middle that want to like that idea, but also like the idea of how can we share that journey, how can we leverage what we want to do collaboratively, and is there an opportunity to do that? So I think it's about tapping into those people that are in that middle ground that are looking for the next step beyond simply running their own farms.
And how's it gone? Have you kicked the goals that you expected that you would?
Look, I think even the fact that we could get 10 enterprises together talking about opportunities and starting to build the model is a huge win. We're certainly taking a long-term perspective. So this isn't going to happen tomorrow. If it was easy, everyone would be doing it. So this is a hard slog, and we're dealing with a lot of competing factors. But I haven't had anyone tell me that that's it's a really dumb idea. I mean, I love listening to people's opinions about what we're doing and what's wrong with it. I love hearing that, because I think we've got to take on board that feedback, and we've got to understand people's concerns. But I've really had no one say, that's not going to work. I think there's a couple of things that are happening around, producers and where production's at. And then I think things are happening in the external environment that mean the timing's right for farmers to move beyond production and start really looking at opportunities outside their farm gate that can leverage what they're already doing make them do what they're doing better, but also create new value in the supply chain.
Yeah, one of the things we've heard a number of times in the course of this series is how generous other cooperatives are in sharing their hard learned lessons. Did you reach out to any that were in your space, or even some that were in completely different commodity sectors, for a little bit of advice so that you didn't make the same mistakes they did when they set up?
Absolutely. I mean, that's one of the values of being a cooperative is that cooperative community. And without a doubt, you know, I'm confident that I could ring the chair of any cooperative, and they would talk to me about, you know, they would answer my questions. They would help me deal with any issue that we're dealing with. And I've done that. I've spoken to lots of different cooperatives, not just farming cooperatives, but, you know, across the board. And that support is certainly there. And I guess it certainly makes you feel that, you know, you're part of something that's, you know, really quite significant, and that's exciting.
Now, in terms of identifying the people that you wanted to, you know, to work with and get involved in the Beef Collaboration Project, how did you go through that process? Was it kind of just a natural extension of the relationships you already had in your area, or were you looking for people to meet certain criteria and bring something to the table to the organisation?
Yeah, look, we didn't have any set criteria. You know, we didn't do a public notice and invite people along. We really just used our own networks, and people kind of found us. So we certainly put the idea out there, and people that were interested approached us to be involved. And interestingly, we attracted a certain kind of producer. You know, we attracted producers who, you know, have done other things. So, you know, a lot of the guys in our group have been involved in other fields. You know, we had an accountant, we had a lawyer, we've got a vet. So we've got different skills across the board. So people that have, you know, bringing with them really interesting perspectives beyond simply, you know, production. And I guess we also got people that were looking for something else beyond simply producing. So I say to people that if you're, you know, there's lots of low-hanging fruit in the beef industry, production-wise, to pick. You know, if you're still picking that low-hanging fruit, well, that's where you're best focusing your efforts. But if your business is humming along and you're profitable, then you're the kind of candidate that we want. And so our model's not for everyone. I mean, I think cooperatives are for everyone, but you know, it depends on the business model that's being developed. But certainly for us, we're about attracting a certain kind of producer. And the way we've gone about it is just by talking about our ideas and seeing who turns up. And that seems to have worked really, really well in getting a group of members who you know, have some really passionate and exciting ideas about what the opportunities are.
Look, there's been some eye-watering prices paid for beef in your neck of the woods in the last little while. How do you corral that focus for them to be in for the long haul when they see wonderful opportunities, albeit you know, short-term ones? How do you emphasise the fact that, look, for this to really work, we've got to be there through the good times and into the not so good times?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I think certainly momentum has slowed because, you know, prices are so good. So I think, you know, most of us are making hay while the sun shines, and we've got to do this. This is a big profit year. But as producers, you know, we know that, you know, we're all still largely in the commodity game. We know that the price of commodity, you know, always falls to the lowest cost of production. So that means in low supply years, you know, we make money. So that's this year, we're in a fairly low supply year, that's driving prices up. We know in high supply years, we lose money. You know, that was 2014. And we know in those middle supply years, we'll cover our costs. So we're trying to get out of that cycle. We're trying to look at, you know, value beyond that cycle. And I think, you know, the reality is there are going to be times in the cooperative where there may be prices outside the cooperative that are higher. but you're certainly in it for the long term. You're certainly not committing all of your animals, into the cooperative, so you've got that flexibility. And you're also, our models, not just about selling cattle and selling beef. So we're looking at creating other value beyond simply selling an animal. And I guess that's where we focus in years like this year. There are other things the cooperative can offer. So the focus is very much on, adding value, not simply, sort of pulling animals and selling them. So that's, I guess, how we can manage those and I guess the other point is that these highs, it really illustrates the opportunity for supply chains to think differently about the way they connect. While this is this current high is great for producers, it's not so great for processors, and we need a model where we're all able to make a profit in a fairly in an enduring way. Our profit shouldn't be at the sake of someone further down the chain, and vice versa.
And one would suggest that the history of the Australian beef industry has tended to be that they've taken short-term profits when they could at the expense of maybe some long-term relationships. Why is it, do you suppose, that cooperatives have tended to flourish more obviously and more successfully and more sustainably in commodities like dairy and grains, and not so much in beef?
So I think there's the obvious perishability issue. So dairy, you can't hold your milk for another week. It's a perishable product. It's got to be sold. Whereas beef, if you don't like the price this week, you can put them back in the paddock and see what you get next week or next month. I mean, I'd argue that that's changing now with the high value of animals and the specifications around carcasses. Once those animals are ready to go, they've got to go. So I think traditionally, the reason that there aren't as many cooperatives in beef has to do with primarily with processing. And the consolidation around processing. It's a very hard industry to get into. It's a very complex industry. It's very capital intensive. So it's all very well for a group of producers to say we want to sell our own beef. You've got to get access to a processing plant. Very hard to do that without a huge capital injection. So that is a huge hurdle. That's different to, say, a horticultural cooperative where you might need to, simply build a packing shed, which has less, capital requirement. I also think, the variability of our production systems in the north mean, it is very difficult to commit to long-term supply arrangements when you're really juggling, the variability of climate. So I think that's also that's a challenge. But I also think what's happening now in the external environment is there's sort of external drivers around beef and the value around beef. Beef used to be, the noun. Now it's all about the adjective of beef. It's about the organic beef. It's about the different breeds. It's about the values that consumers are looking for. So things are changing. Branding's changing, technology's changing, the opportunities are evolving, which start to open the door for a beef cooperative. And those sorts of things didn't exist 10, 15, 20 years ago. So I think, historically, that's why we haven't seen the beef co-ops. And I think there's also, a school of thought that the fact that we are such, rugged, independent beings means that we want to roll out of bed in the morning and do our own thing. The idea of sort of having to align our business with others, can be a challenge and still is. So I think, that historical, character of farming and the farmer certainly has played a role.
Look, one of the things we've also heard in the course of this series is that farmers involved in cooperatives get an enormous kick out of seeing what they produce marketed and sold within their local community. They draw an enormous amount of satisfaction and pride from the whole community, knowing that they've got a lot of skin in the game and that they are employing people in their area and producing something worthwhile and the best quality they possibly can deliver. Is that something
That's right. And
down the track
yeah,
that you want to really get into?
absolutely. I think that idea is what initially gets people interested in the cooperative. They want to sell their own beef. I guess the journey we've been on, while that might get people in the door, we pretty quickly realised you're not going to get there tomorrow. So we've looked at, well, what can we control? What do we have control over? So we've looked at how can we create value in different ways. And I guess that's sort of leads us towards getting to a point where we can start to, optimize supply and get into the supply chain. And the second comment I'd make is that, I think the idea of farmers selling their own product and being close to the consumer is really such a powerful one. Because, sort of my key mantra is that, it's family farming is more than just production. It's about all those other things. It's about integrity. It's about that commitment. It's about community and the environment. And if we don't, as farmers, leverage that value, it's someone else in the supply chain that does. And we know that it's the person closest to the consumer that can leverage the most value. So if that's not a farmer or a farmer cooperative, then it's someone else in the supply chain, taking that value. And I think that's why, it needs to move beyond, that ideal to, it's a real business proposition, and there's real value in building that model and taking that opportunity.
You've obviously had a very clear purpose, and you have enjoyed the opportunity to not only study systems here, but abroad. But I guess along the way, there must have been some very character-building tests as well. What were some of the obstacles that you needed to overcome, and how did you go doing that? And are you still trying to overcome them?
Absolutely. I mean, this is a long-term proposition, and there's certainly been challenges. I think, when you're living in a rural community and you're putting yourself out there with a vision, you're taking an enormous risk personally. So I think that takes a lot of courage, and that's hard work. That's not easy. I think in terms of a cooperative, there are some unique challenges. I think, like any business, where we've been in the startup phase, we've been down in the trenches building the model. When you're doing that within a cooperative construct, and looking at running the process democratically, that can be challenging. Most startups are one or two people getting together and building the model. We've done it collaboratively, and so you're having some tough conversations, and there's been frustrations, and there's been people leave the group because it's been too time consuming. So there are certain realities around that, as there are in any business. A cooperative, it's not unique in that sense. I think there's also the reality that we're all farmers running our own businesses. So this is a side hustle, if you like, in terms of what we're trying to do. I'm not full-time on the cooperative being paid a wage. So that's a real challenge. You have to balance the realities of what you're already doing with the opportunities going forward. And that, that's been a challenge. But we're still here, and we're still, very much optimistic about what the opportunities are.
And have you found that there's a developing level of cooperative literacy among banks and financial institutions? Because sometimes they're a bit leery about, how they can actually interact and who they're dealing with and things like that. What's been your experience on that level?
Look, we haven't taken it to the banks yet, but, I think, it's getting harder to get a home loan. So without a doubt, it's going to be hard for cooperatives to also access capital. For us, it's about, and this is a challenge that I think beef cooperatives often have, is if you're talking about processing, you're talking about that large capital injection. In the US, I've seen models where cooperatives are, raising capital through their members, through their shareholdings. They're then getting their members to commit to delivery, and on the basis of that commitment, they're able to go to the banks and sort of leverage capital. Again, as I said, that's difficult in the north. Producers are very reluctant to commit long-term supply. Based on an uncertain price. So that's challenging. I think for us, it's about starting small. We've got seed funding. We're charging a subscription. We are looking at an initial, founding shareholder class. So we're raising capital, step by step, funding our kind of mini enterprises, and then leveraging that to take the next step. And I think the other thing I would say is that I think there are really non-traditional capital sources. So, who's to say, a McDonald's doesn't want to fund a beef cooperative or provide some seed funding for us to do some different projects or some different activities. There's different opportunities beyond what banks can offer. So, we're not looking for large chunks of capital quite yet, but I don't think I'm put off by by what the banks may or may not do. I think there are really other players out there that can play a role if you're able to create value. So it comes back to really what your offering is and how you're able to sustain that. And if that works, I think the capital will be there, whether it's through members, shareholdings, debentures, or whether it's through, other banks and other players.
Well, they went to extraordinary lengths during the Royal Commission to say these days that they've learned a lot of the lessons of the past of how they treated particularly regional, rural and remote parts of Australia, and allegedly they're all ears. Let's hope that's the case. Which leads us to a reminder about tonight's poll question. And that is, what is the biggest motivator for starting a cooperative? Have a go. Click on the poll in the live chat to the right of this stream to select your answer. We're with Emma Robinson from North Queensland, a beef producer and the founder of the Beef Collaboration Project. So looking, crystal ball gazing now, Emma, what do you see in the medium to long term?
What we see is that we're very much, doing what we're already doing in terms of our production business, but we're able to leverage new value. So we're buying our inputs collaboratively. We're sharing the cost of some of the systems that we're introducing on our properties, such as our OH&S systems, our labour systems. So we're reducing our costs. We're also looking at, data and how we use technology and how we can leverage the data between members. And hopefully, down the track, we're actually, optimising our cattle supply and looking at how we can either work differently with existing processes or start to get into the value chain in our own way, and, branding our own beef and marketing it.
One of the things we've heard also during the course of this exercise, this series, is that the longer that people are involved in cooperatives and the more collaboration that they are part of and the more mentoring that they see, they actually do a better job on their own plates. They tend to lift a cog, and they tend to be probably slightly more optimistic about the future as well. Has that been your experience?
Absolutely. I think, we live in an isolated area. It is quite easy to feel like you're not part of something bigger than your own farm. So I certainly think peer-to-peer support through a cooperative provides, lots of opportunities. And, there's lots of talk about the low uptake of R&D in particularly Northern Australia of beef R&D. I've got no doubt that if you look at the adoption of some of those processes through a cooperative, you're going to really accelerate that, because people really value peer-to-peer support. They want to know what other farmers are doing and how they're utilising technology, and that's a great way of fast tracking different adoption techniques. So. Absolutely, I think it creates a great community for farmers that certainly makes them better farmers.
Emma, it's been terrific talking to you. We really appreciate the opportunity for you to join us today from the kids' classroom. It's obviously school holidays in the great state of Queensland, so they're off obviously doing far more interesting things. But it's fantastic that the strongest signal in your house is in the schoolroom. I think it probably does there's a message in that for all of us. Thanks so much for your time and your insights. It's been really good to have you back on Cooperative Conversations, and all the very best for the Beef Collaboration Project. Sounds like you're on the right track.
Thanks, Pete. Thanks for your time.
We really appreciate that. Now, listen, we are only part way through our discussions for today. I want to make sure that you completely understand that we'll be back shortly with a round table. We want you to tune in for that, where we look into the people factor. That will be tonight's roundtable discussion, how to attract, keep and engage membership in your cooperatives. Probably one of the most important things. It's a people person business. Emma Robinson is going to be back to join us. She will be joined by BCCM CEO Melina Morrison. We'll be talking to John Seckham, who's the chairman of the Northern Cooperative Meat Company. Kate Davies will be joining us from the Torrewina Prime Lamb Group in New South Wales. And as I said, Melina Morrison, our CEO of BCCM, will be helping wrangle that whole and keep that and glue that whole discussion together. That's coming up at 7:45. Another little reminder, be sure to check on the other episodes in this series. It's rolling along quite nicely now and built up a really good head of steam. You go to conversations.coopfarming.coop to find our full lineup of episodes, and there's been some great stuff and great personalities and great insights there. And remember, the series is available now and on demand. Now, if tonight has really inspired you to have a look yourself at a cooperative and how it might work for your business, or maybe you're already exploring the idea of it and want some assistance, just go to the Cooperative Farming website for a bunch of different ways that the Business Council for Cooperatives and Mutuals can give you a hand. There are educational bursaries available to support farmers, fishers and forests to get through that process and access relevant cooperative information. And there's even a hotline that you can ring if you want to speak to somebody to find out what you need to start a co-op. But for now, that's it. We want you to join us later for the roundtable and indeed in future episodes of Cooperative Conversations. See you soon.